Mastermind or monster? The brutal truth behind the Müller family murders. A family's tragic end. The Müller murders. It's hard to fathom the level of cruelty that befell the Müller family. For William and Nancy to die in such a horrific manner was already appalling. But for their young daughter, Sarah, just 8 years old, to be tortured, wrapped in plastic, tied with duct tape, and weighted with a 60-pound rock before being thrown into a lake, there is simply no justification. The sheer brutality of this act sent shockwaves through Polk County, Arkansas, in 1996. What began as an unthinkable crime would soon unravel into something even darker, revealing an intricate web of white supremacist ideology at its core. This case stands out as one of the most disturbing and ruthless examples of violence. It forces us to confront a chilling question. How does a human mind become so twisted, so detached from compassion, that it spirals into such merciless acts? To understand the gravity of this crime, we must first take a closer look at the victims, the Müller family. William Müller wasn't just an ordinary father. As a licensed federal firearms dealer, his life revolved around guns, buying, selling, and collecting them. He was also a self-employed electrician. He and his wife Nancy shared a deep love for their only daughter, Sarah, who was the center of their lives. The family lived in Tilly, Arkansas, a quiet, close-knit community where they homeschooled Sarah and often spent weekends bonding at gun shows. The Müllers' home was a reflection of their lifestyle, packed with firearms, ammunition, and a considerable amount of cash. It was this treasure trove of valuables that made them an attractive target. In 1995, their home was burglarized by Chevie Kehoe, a family acquaintance. Kehoe stole guns and cash, but the Müllers, resilient as ever, didn't let the setback deter their passion or their business. They moved forward, unaware that this incident would become a pivotal piece in the horrifying events to come. Fast forward to January 1996. The Müllers were likely enjoying a quiet day out, unaware that two predators, Chevie Kehoe and Daniel Lewis Lee, were lying in wait at their home. Dressed as FBI agents, the intruders pounced the moment the family walked through the door. What followed was nothing short of a nightmare. The family was tied to chairs as the intruders demanded to know the location of their valuables. When William refused to cooperate, the men escalated their interrogation. They separated the family and subjected them to unimaginable torture. But when the parents held firm, the intruders turned their attention to Sarah. This is where the story takes an especially dark turn. The men interrogated Sarah about the family's fortune. To force her compliance, they used an electric cattle prod device meant for livestock on a child. Though the device wasn't lethal, the pain it inflicted was excruciating, especially for someone so young. Sarah, in her innocence and terror, finally revealed the location of the cash and firearms. The intruders found $50,000 in cash along with an arsenal of guns and ammunition. You might think that after obtaining what they wanted, they would leave. But that's not what happened. The nightmare wasn't over. Instead, the men used stun guns to knock the family unconscious, savoring the agonizing process as if it was a cruel game. Then, in a final act of unspeakable brutality, they suffocated each family member by placing sealed plastic bags over their heads. Imagine the helplessness and horror of knowing your loved ones are enduring the same fate, and you're powerless to stop it. Shockingly, the Müllers' bodies weren't discovered immediately. For 2 weeks, their absence went unnoticed. Nancy's mother, Irene, was the first to sense something was wrong. Nancy always called to check in after their trips, especially when they attended gun shows. But this time, there was only silence. Irene's gut told her something terrible had happened. When she reported her concerns to Sheriff Jay Winters, he agreed to investigate. But at first, neighbors seemed unconcerned, dismissing the family's disappearance as a spur-of-the-moment trip. It wasn't until February 11th that the case took a grim turn. A farmer stumbled upon the Muller's Jeep, abandoned on the side of a highway far from home. Inside, authorities found Nancy's purse, complete with her wallet and ID. But there was no sign of the family. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with no leads and no answers, just the eerie silence of their absence. It wasn't until 5 months later that the case broke open. An elderly couple, enjoying a day of fishing, snagged something unusual in the bayou near Russellville. When they reeled it in, they discovered a boot still containing the remains of a man's leg. Horrified, they contacted authorities, who soon found more bodies in the water. Weighted with rocks and wrapped in plastic, the remains were identified as William, Nancy, and Sarah Müller. What had started as a missing persons case had now become a triple homicide investigation. But the discovery of their bodies was only the beginning of unraveling the horrors behind this crime. What drives someone to commit such heinous acts? And how could an entire family, including an innocent child, fall victim to such cruelty? These are questions that linger as the story unfolds. A chilling discovery in the bayou. It began with an ordinary fishing trip. An elderly couple, enjoying the quiet serenity of a bayou near Russellville, was casting their lines when the woman's hook snagged on something heavy. At first, she thought it was debris or perhaps a submerged log. But as she tried to free her line, she made a horrifying discovery: a boot, still containing the bone of a man's leg. Panicked, she cut the line and rushed to contact authorities. This gruesome find triggered a large-scale search led by Sheriff J. Winters. Divers and teams equipped with metal hooks scoured the bayou. By the end of the day, they had recovered more human remains. A torso weighed down with a rock, the head wrapped in duct tape. From the very first examination, it was clear that this was no accident or random tragedy. The scene pointed to a deliberate, cold, and calculated act of triple execution. Initially, investigators speculated that the remains belonged to a 6-year-old girl who had been reported missing in a nearby county the previous year. But further analysis of the size and clothing ruled out the possibility. The suspicion then shifted to a more horrifying thought. Could this be Sarah Müller and her family? The next day, search efforts uncovered two more partial bodies. The chilling pattern was undeniable. All 3 torsos were weighted with rocks, their heads wrapped tightly in plastic bags and secured with duct tape. Dental records, DNA analysis, and clothing would soon confirm the horrifying truth. The remains belonged to William, Nancy, and Sarah Müller. What had once been a missing persons case had now turned into a brutal triple homicide investigation. Piecing together the crime scene, the coroner's examination revealed that the bodies had likely been in the water since January 11th, the last day anyone had seen the Müller family alive. But the evidence didn't stop there. Investigators found tiny specks of blue paint adhere to the duct tape used on the victims. The samples were sent to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C., where they determined the paint was consistent with the type used on General Motors vehicles. This crucial lead suggested that the bodies had been transported in a GM vehicle before being dumped in the bayou. From this clue, authorities deduced that at least 2 individuals were involved in the crime. One suspect drove the blue vehicle with the victims' bodies, while the other followed behind in the Muller's Jeep. By the time the bodies were discarded, the family had already been suffocated, their lives stolen in a heinous act of cruelty. Following the trail of evidence, the investigation soon shifted to the Müller family's belongings. After their disappearance, most of their valuables had been collected by relatives. However, a few items remained in storage at their landlord's garage. Among these was a CT-45 gun case, complete with its serial number. But the weapon it once contained was missing. Investigators also uncovered a family photo showing William Müller with some friends. The team entered the gun's serial number into the National Crime Information Center database. A hit came back, tracing the weapon to a man named Travis Burr, who had been arrested months earlier in Seattle for carrying a concealed firearm. When questioned, Burr admitted he'd bought the handgun at a gun show and provided a description of the men who sold it to him. One of the descriptions immediately stood out. Investigators showed him the photo found in the Müller belongings, and Burr pointed to one of the individuals, Chevie Kehoe. If the name sounds familiar, it should. Chevie Kehoe was the same man who had robbed the Müller home a year earlier, stealing guns and cash. He wasn't just a family acquaintance. He was a man with a long criminal history involving firearms and ties to a sinister network of white supremacists. A break in the case. For nearly a year, the investigation seemed to stall. But then, a lucky break came in South Dakota. A state trooper noticed a suspicious blue Chevy Suburban parked in a handicapped spot, its bumper adorned with unusual stickers. Inside the vehicle, the trooper found Sean Haynes and his pregnant girlfriend asleep. When the serial numbers on the firearms in the vehicle were checked, one turned out to be a stolen AR-15 rifle registered to none other than the Müllers. Haynes was arrested and questioned. Under pressure, he revealed he had acquired the rifle 6 months earlier at a Washington motel. The man he traded with, none other than Chevie Kehoe, Kirby's eldest son. By now, investigators had to prime suspects, Chevie Kehoe and Daniel Lewis Lee. But this case wasn't just about stolen firearms or even murder. To truly understand what drove these men to commit such heinous acts, one had to delve into the dark history of the Kehoe family, a family unlike any other. The Kehoe family, a breeding ground for hate. Chevie Kehoe, 26 years old at the time, grew up in an environment where white supremacy wasn't just a belief, it was a way of life. His parents, Kirby and Gloria Kehoe, raised their children steeped in radical, hateful ideologies. When Chevie was still a baby, the family moved from sunny Florida to the secluded hills of Madison County, North Carolina. Years later, they relocated to Stevens County, Washington, where Chevie's path toward extremism would take shape. At first glance, Chevie showed promise. He was an honor student at Cavill Junior High School, with potential that could have led him anywhere. But in 1988, his parents decided to homeschool him. Their reasoning? They wanted to provide more focused attention. But instead of fostering growth, they created a bubble of paranoia and hate. Chevie was groomed in anti-government ideologies, taught how to commit robberies, and even trained to evade law enforcement. The Kehoe household became a breeding ground for white supremacy. By the time Chevie reached adulthood, his ambitions were terrifying. He dreamed of overthrowing the U.S. government and establishing what he called the Aryan People's Republic, a utopia built on hate and violence. This twisted vision consumed Chevie's life and influenced every decision he made. It led to acts of crime, violence, and eventually, murder. In 1995, he and a partner targeted Malcolm and Jill Fredman, a Jewish couple who had once employed him, holding them at gunpoint during a robbery. Chevie made it clear his hatred wasn't just ideological, it was personal and violent. A family hunted the violent legacy of the Kehoe brothers. This wasn't just a random act of violence. Chevie Kehoe targeted the Müller family not only for their wealth, but because of their perceived differences. The hateful ideology instilled in Chevie from a young age turned prejudice into violence. This was no impulsive crime, it was deliberate, methodical, and fueled by deep-seated beliefs of superiority and dominance. Given Chevie's history of criminal activity, it wasn't surprising that he and his father, Chevie Kehoe, had been on law enforcement's radar for years. But despite their lengthy criminal records, they seemed to slip through the cracks time and time again. After the Müller murders, Both men vanished without a trace, leaving investigators scrambling for leads. Their disappearance ended abruptly on February 15, 1997, when a state trooper in Ohio stopped a blue Chevy Suburban driving erratically. The vehicle swerved, moving suspiciously slowly, drawing the trooper's attention. Inside the car were two men. The driver avoided eye contact entirely, while the passenger gave the trooper an unnerving stare through the rearview mirror. Acting on instinct, the trooper ran the vehicle's license plate and discovered it had expired. Neither occupant had a valid driver's license. When the driver was asked to exit the vehicle, he complied, but his defiance was clear. He warned the trooper not to touch him, raising immediate suspicions. As deputies called for a tow truck to impound the vehicle, the situation escalated. The driver bolted back to the car, triggering a chaotic chase. Then, as officers tried to restrain him, the passenger pulled out a handgun and began firing. Amid the gunfire and confusion, Chevie Kehoe, the driver, managed to jump back into the Suburban and speed away. The passenger, his brother Chevie Kehoe, fled into the nearby woods. Authorities spent the entire day searching for Chevie, but he evaded capture. The Kehoe brothers had escaped once again, a trail of violence and fear. Chevie didn't go far before another violent encounter. Later that day, he found himself in a shootout in the parking lot of an electrical supply company in Wilmington. The police officers, Richard Rickwood and Sergeant Robert Bob Martin, responded to the scene. The chaos erupted into a full-scale gunfight, during which an innocent bystander, 56-year-old Frank Marston, was struck in the shoulder. The incident was captured on police dash cameras, footage that would later be aired on shows like World's Scariest Police Shootouts and Most Shocking. The Kehoe brothers' violent spree had now become a national spectacle, their faces and crimes broadcast to millions. Meanwhile, the brothers continued their flight across the country, traveling in secret with their families in an RV. Sightings of their vehicle poured in from multiple states, including West Virginia, Alabama, Texas, and Montana. But every time law enforcement got close, the Kehoes managed to slip away. At one point, investigators discovered their abandoned RV on a desolate stretch of road in Wyoming. Inside, they found a disturbing cache of weapons and tools, firearms, ammunition, fake FBI jackets, U.S. Marshals badges, and even materials for bomb making. Although no live explosives were found, it was clear the brothers were preparing for something far worse. The escalation of their violence alarmed authorities. With every passing day, the Kehoes grew bolder and more dangerous, leaving law enforcement racing against the clock to prevent further tragedy. A break in the chase. On June 16, 1997, investigators finally caught a break. Chevie Kehoe, exhausted from life on the run, decided to turn himself in. Chevie revealed that after the Ohio shootout, he and Chevie had sought refuge on a remote ranch in southern Utah. The ranch owners had provided them with room and board in exchange for help around the property. But the arrangement quickly soured. Chevie's paranoia and violent temper alienated even his brother. He made chilling threats, including killing his wife Karina, who had Native American ancestry, and plotting to murder his own parents, Kirby and Gloria, to raise his younger brothers in a white supremacist utopia. Eventually, tensions boiled over. After a heated argument, Chevie feared for his life and the safety of his family. He fled the ranch under the cover of night, driving nearly 1,000 miles back to Washington State. His departure marked the beginning of the end for Chevie Kehoe. Just days later, on June 17, 1997, Chevie was arrested. But the revelations didn't stop there. Chevie's testimony would provide crucial details about Chevie's involvement in the Müller murders. He admitted that Chevie had confessed to killing the family, with the help of another accomplice, a mother's confession, and a chilling truth. Around the same time, Chevie Kehoe, the patriarch of the family, was also arrested. While Chevie had no direct involvement in the Müller murders, his criminal history painted a dark picture. However, the real bombshell came from Gloria Kehoe, Chevie's mother. In a shocking revelation, Gloria told investigators that Chevie had confessed the full details of the Müller murders to her. According to her, the crime wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It had been meticulously planned for over a year. The seeds of the crime were sown back in February 1995, during the first robbery of the Müller home. William Müller, suspecting Chevie Kehoe's involvement, had confronted him, allegedly with harsh and disrespectful words. To Chevie, this perceived insult was a personal affront, one that he couldn't let go. Chevie's twisted sense of honor and deep-seated hatred turned the confrontation into the justification he needed. It wasn't just about stealing valuables. It became about exacting vengeance and asserting dominance. But Chevie's plan went beyond revenge. The cache of firearms and ammunition in the Müller home was a treasure trove. For someone with his ambitions, the weapons would serve as tools for his ultimate goal: building an armed, white supremacist stronghold. A dark alliance, Chevie Kehoe and Daniel Lewis Lee. Chevie Kehoe's motive for targeting the Müller family wasn't solely driven by personal resentment. While the confrontation between William Müller and Chevie Kehoe may have ignited his anger, it was greed and ideology that ultimately sealed the family's fate. Chevie had learned that William Müller possessed an arsenal of high-value firearms, advanced equipment, and ammunition. For someone like Chevie, these weapons represented far more than material wealth. They were the tools needed to fuel his vision of a white supremacist utopia. Gloria Kehoe's testimony didn't stop at implicating her son. She revealed the involvement of a second man, Daniel Lewis Lee. Lee wasn't just an accomplice. He was a like-minded extremist, someone Chevie had met through their shared connections to white supremacist groups. Both men were deeply committed to the twisted dream of establishing a whites-only nation. Together, they hatched a plan that was as calculated as it was brutal. Their goal was clear: rob the Müllers of their weapons, eliminate them to erase witnesses, and leave no evidence that could tie the crime back to them or Chevie Kehoe. It was a crime rooted in both greed and hate, designed not just to enrich them, but to further their extremist cause. The Night of Terror. According to Gloria, the plan was executed on January 11, 1996. While the Müllers were attending a gun show, Chevie and Lee, disguised as law enforcement officers, broke into the Müller home and waited. When the family returned, the men ambushed them, binding them and interrogating them about the location of their valuables. But there was one part of the plan that didn't go as expected. Lee hesitated when it came to killing Sarah, the Müllers' 8-year-old daughter. Despite his involvement in the murders of William and Nancy, Lee found himself unable to harm the young girl. Chevie, however, had no such reservations. Cold and unfeeling, he took matters into his own hands and killed Sarah himself. This detail, perhaps the most chilling of all, underscored the level of brutality Chevie was capable of. For him, there were no lines that couldn't be crossed, no acts too cruel if they served his purpose. Justice in the courtroom. It wasn't until March of 1999 that Chevie Kehoe and Daniel Lewis Lee were brought to trial for the murders. The trial was a turning point, as both Cheney and Gloria Kehoe testified against Chevie, revealing the full extent of his crimes. The court heard how the murders had been meticulously planned, how the family was tortured, and how Sarah's life was taken in cold blood. Chevie Kehoe was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Daniel Lewis Lee, however, faced a different fate. He was sentenced to death, a punishment that would become a point of controversy in the years to follow. The troubled past of Daniel Lewis Lee. Lee's path to this crime was shaped by a life of instability, violence, and unchecked rage. From a young age, he struggled with severe neurological issues, including seizures, which often landed him in mental health facilities. However, these placements were short-lived due to his increasingly violent behavior. By the time Lee was 17, his criminal tendencies had fully emerged. He was implicated in the brutal murder of Joseph Wavra during a robbery, his third murder, and a string of violent crimes. Yet, remarkably, he avoided a murder charge, receiving only a suspended sentence for robbery. This leniency, arguably, emboldened him, allowing his violent impulses to spiral out of control. In 1995, Lee met Chevie Kehoe. The two bonded over their shared hatred of the government and their shared dream of creating a white supremacist stronghold. Lee's trajectory, already dark, took an even more sinister turn under Chevie's influence. A failed redemption. When Lee stood trial, he attempted to soften his image, claiming he had a good side and could change. But the court wasn't convinced. His violent past and unrepentant behavior made his pleas for mercy ring hollow. On July 14, 2020, Daniel Lewis Lee was executed by lethal injection at a federal prison in Indiana, marking the first federal execution in 17 years. As he faced his final moments, Lee maintained his innocence, stating, "I didn't do it," his claim, however, did little to sway public opinion or the courts. Questions of justice. Despite his role as the mastermind and primary instigator, Chevie Kehoe avoided the death penalty and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Lee, whose role was arguably less central, paid the ultimate price. This disparity in sentencing sparked debate. Was justice truly served? Did the system fail to hold the most culpable individual fully accountable? The case of the Müller family murders remains a harrowing example of how hate and greed can converge into unimaginable violence. It's a story that forces us to confront not only the depths of human cruelty, but also the flaws in our justice system. As for Chevie Kehoe, he remains behind bars, his dreams of a supremacist utopia reduced to a cell. But the scars he left behind, the lives destroyed, the family torn apart serve as a haunting reminder of the consequences of unchecked hatred. Final reflections, justice, consequences, and lingering questions. Chevie Kehoe, the mastermind behind the horrific Müller family murders, escaped the death penalty. Meanwhile, Daniel Lewis Lee, whose role, while significant, was arguably less central, was executed. This perplexing disparity in sentencing raises an unsettling question. How could the architect of such a gruesome crime avoid the ultimate punishment, while his accomplice paid the highest price? Even more troubling is the shadow of other alleged connections, like Chevie's rumored involvement with Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. Although no concrete evidence ever tied him directly to the bombing, the possibility looms like a dark cloud, a chilling testament to the circles of extremism in which he operated. Chevie's life remains a grim reminder of how unchecked hatred and a thirst for power can devastate not only victims but society at large. As for his family, their legal troubles didn't end with the Müller case. Chevie Kehoe and Chevie Kehoe continued to tread the path of crime, amassing firearms, ammunition, and even growing marijuana in an off-grid compound. Their arrests in later years painted a picture of a family that never truly broke free from a cycle of violence and lawlessness. The bigger picture. This case isn't just about the brutal murders of the Müller family. It's about the consequences of extremism, the fragility of justice, and the ways hatred can poison generations. Chevie's dream of creating a white utopia was rooted in a belief system that thrives on division and violence. But where did this hatred lead? To a lifetime in a maximum security prison, to broken families, and to innocent lives destroyed in its wake. Justice in cases like this often feels imperfect. The legal system, though designed to protect and punish, doesn't always provide the closure that victims' families deserve. Was Chevie's life sentence truly enough? Did Daniel Lee deserve the death penalty? These are questions that linger, leaving many of us to wrestle with the complexities of justice and morality. A moment to reflect, a truth in the shadows. We believe in not just uncovering the darkest crimes, but also shedding light on the broader lessons they teach us. Stories like this force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the capacity for human cruelty, the dangers of unchecked ideology, and the gaps in our justice system. What do you think about this case? Do you believe the punishment fit the crime? Or did the legal system fail to deliver true justice? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and join the conversation. If this story resonated with you, consider supporting our work by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and turning on notifications. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light, stories that demand attention, reflection, and action. Together, we can honor the victims, question the systems in place, and strive for a world where tragedies like this never happen again. Thank you for watching Truth in the Shadows. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.